Local farmers have long known about these rock shelters hidden behind the brush. Shelter walls are decorated with scenes from everyday life. A net to catch deer. A stick to collect honey from a beehive. A hand shielding the eyes. Here, 3 people are helping a pregnant woman give birth. Some of the paintings are harder to interpret. These curious-looking figures are thought to be men in disguise, dancing with women. Other images show human figures with decorated bodies. Some wear masks. They hint at some kind of ritual. No one yet has figured out what these scenes mean. But local farmers claim to know who originally painted them.
Our elders used to tell us they'd been made by Indians, known locally as the Fierce Ones.
Indians were the obvious candidates. Most of the people who live in northeastern Brazil today are descended from European settlers and African slaves. But these ancestral groups arrived in Brazil just 500 years ago. When the Portuguese first discovered Brazil, they found that Indians were already here. And a few of the local villagers are descendants of mixed marriages between Indians, farmers, and slaves. Indians, in fact, had been in America for thousands of years. Scientists today can tell precisely when they arrived and from where. All native peoples in South and North America belong to a racial type known as Mongoloid. They're descended from the ancient peoples of Siberia. During the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Mongoloid peoples were the first to enter the New World, or so experts thought. The Brazilian finds point to a very different story of the discovery of the Americas. Paintings on these rock shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chased giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age, long before the arrival of the Indians. There's a playful feel to many of the scenes. Here, a group of men are standing on each other's shoulders, just like a circus act. And here, a rare romantic moment. The scenes conjure up a lost world of innocence, how long ago was this primeval paradise? French archaeologists have just finished digging in Pedra Furada, the largest of the rock shelters. Their aim was to go back in time to a period well before the arrival of American Indians. Every foot they dug took them thousands of years back into prehistory. When they reached layers 40,000 years old, they found these. Pieces of quartzite that look remarkably like stone tools. The edges on one side of the stones were flaked off. Were these stones shaped into cutting tools by human hands? If so, then the history of the discovery of the Americas would have to be rewritten. But if people had been here before the American Indians, surely there would be other traces of their presence. The archaeologists continued to dig, down to depths 50,000 years old. And then they found this. Fragments of animal bone and charcoal. For Anne-Marie Passy, one of the archaeologists involved in the dig, these fragments were proof of human occupation.
We
found structures shaped like hearths. Next to the charcoal, depending on the period, we sometimes found food leftovers of animals they may have eaten.
The Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9,000 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we start running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people was anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being Mongoloid.
Luthia belongs to a race found historically along the rim of the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, in the islands of South Asia, and in Australia and Melanesia. Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Nevis has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
But how could Luthia be African and Australian? According to Walter Nevis, there's a very simple explanation. Luthia is a bit of both. The first humans originated in Africa. It's known that around 100,000 years ago, waves of people migrated out of Africa. One such wave went east, and 60,000 years ago, it reached Australia. Luthia, it seems, belonged to a race of humans descended from Africans, a race that eventually became today's Australian Aborigines. But if the first people to enter the New World were the ancestors of present-day Aborigines, how could they possibly have reached the Americas? Australia and Southeast Asia are on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, more than 8,000 miles away from South America. It's true that during the Ice Age, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. In theory, the ancestors of the Aborigines could have migrated north and crossed over into Alaska. But they wouldn't have made it very far.